Those were our days, a 1950s childhood remembered. It always began with the sunlight creeping through those thin cotton curtains in my bedroom, just enough to stir my eyelids, but never harsh enough to wake me with a start. On Maple Street, in the soft hum of 1950s America, mornings weren't rushed. They didn't scream at you through alarms or flashing screens. They whispered through the scent of bacon in the cast iron pan or the distant clink of milk bottles on a neighbor's doorstep. Our mornings were slow, and that was the beauty of them. I remember the milkman, Mr. Dorsey, always on time, always whistling some tune from the radio. His horse-drawn cart was something of a legend in our neighborhood. You'd hear the gentle clip-clop before you ever saw it. If you woke up early enough, you could watch him make his way down the block, placing glass bottles still cool with condensation into the silver carrier by our door. Sometimes, if you were lucky, you'd get a bottle of chocolate milk, a treat that seemed as luxurious as a birthday gift. My mother would always leave out a folded note and exact change in an envelope. Trust in those days was more common than fences. Inside, breakfast wasn't about grabbing and going. It was toast with a little marshmallow fluff, maybe some peanut butter if we hadn't run out. Sometimes we'd slice a banana onto it, and it felt like we'd invented something brilliant. The fluffernutter was the kind of sandwich that stuck to the roof of your mouth and your memory. We'd sit at the table as a family, Dad with his newspaper, Mom pouring our cereal, and my sister tying ribbons into her pigtails. On the wall hung our rotary phone olive green, with a long cord that wrapped itself into knots. It was the only phone in the house, and if you picked it up while someone else on the party line was using it, you'd hear their whole conversation, whether you liked it or not. That's just how it was back then, shared lines, shared lives. By 8 o'clock, you could hear the sounds of the neighborhood coming alive. Bikes whirring down the sidewalk, baseball cards fluttering in the spokes, creating a sound not unlike a motorboat, a trick we all believed made us go faster. We believed in magic, even if we never said the word aloud. Back then, our playground wasn't a park with rubber floors and bright plastic slides. It was the street, the sidewalks, the driveways, the empty lots. They were ours. From the moment the breakfast dishes were cleared until the sun dipped low behind the rooftops, we belonged to the outdoors. There were no permission slips, no scheduled playdates, no GPS-tracked apps on our wrists. The only rule was, be back by the time the streetlights come on. And so we played with all the urgency of children who believed the world could end if we didn't finish one more game. We'd start with a game of kick the can, using a dented soup can someone's mom had just thrown out. One kid would count to 20, face pressed against the telephone pole, while the rest of us scattered like startled birds. If you were caught, you waited in jail behind the hedge, hoping someone brave enough would sprint in and kick the can to set you free. That was victory freedom delivered with a clang of tin and a squeal of laughter. When we tired of hiding, we'd pull out the chalk, drawing crude squares on the pavement for hopscotch. Or the girls would twirl their double Dutch ropes, handles gripped tight, rhythm set by the flick of their wrists. "Cinderella, dressed in yellow," we'd chant, as someone worked up the courage to leap into the spinning ropes. Timing was everything. One misstep, and you'd get tangled, bruised, or worse, laughed at. But when you nailed it, when your knees bounced high, braids swinging, it felt like flying. Boys played ball, girls played jacks, and everyone got skinned knees. And then, a silence, a pause. Heads would turn. Far down the block came the faint, magical jingle. It started soft, almost like a whisper in the wind. But once you heard it, you couldn't unhear it. The ice cream truck. We called it the Good Humor Man, and he was a hero, magician, and savior rolled into one. His truck was white and boxy, with painted pictures of popsicles and ice cream sandwiches on the side. When he turned the corner, every child in the neighborhood transformed. Games were abandoned mid-play. We'd bolt to our front doors, breathless, calling, "Mom, do we have any change?" Sometimes we were handed a quarter, sometimes a dime, sometimes heartbreakingly nothing. But even then, we'd chase the truck anyway, just to smell the sweetness and dream. If we were lucky, we got a fudge bar or a creamsicle, or if you really wanted to show off a toasted almond bar. You'd hold it like treasure, taking that first bite carefully, not wanting to crack the shell too soon. We'd sit on curbs and porches, knees dusty, voices sticky with sugar, sharing bites and stories and secrets. And if you listened closely, just past the buzz of cicadas and the low hum of a neighbor's lawnmower, you might hear someone still whispering the ice cream truck's melody long after it had gone. Those afternoons, filled with the scent of grass and melted chocolate, never felt like they were slipping away, but they were. Evenings in the 1950s had a rhythm of their own, slower, softer, and somehow sacred. After long days of running through sprinklers and chasing ice cream trucks, we'd tumble inside, sun-kissed and barefoot, our knees still holding the stories of the street. The house smelled of meatloaf or pot roast, sometimes pork chops if we were lucky. Mom cooked while wearing her cotton apron, and the kitchen windows were always open, letting in the sounds of summer crickets, the neighbor's dog, the clink of dishes from next door. We washed our hands in the pink bathroom sink, dried them on the same towel everyone else used, and took our places at the table. Dinner wasn't optional. It was a ritual. Dad sat at the head of the table, still in his white shirt from work, sleeves rolled up. We said grace. We passed the potatoes. We didn't dare complain. And when dinner ended, Mom would clear the table while we made our way to the living room, the center of the evening universe. The TV sat like a shrine in the corner, a black and white zenith with rounded edges, resting on 4 short wooden legs. When it powered on, the screen flickered to life slowly, like it needed to stretch before it worked. And when it finally came in clear, oh, how we watched. Sunday night meant the Ed Sullivan Show. We all had our places. Dad in his armchair, Mom on the sofa, my sister curled with her legs tucked beneath her, and me on the floor, chin in my hands. I remember the night Elvis came on. That voice, that hip shake, that sneaky little grin. My father muttered something about dangerous music, but I saw the way Mom raised one eyebrow and smiled. Other nights brought I Love Lucy, Howdy Doody, or Gunsmoke. They weren't just shows, they were gatherings, shared experiences. The laughter from Lucy's antics, the thrill of cowboys and outlaws, it all became part of our family language. And when the shows were over, just before the TV signed off for the night, we'd stand quietly as the Star-Spangled Banner played. Then the screen faded into a soft static, that familiar hum echoing through the room, until someone got up to switch it off. No remote, no binge-watching, just one night, one memory, and that was enough. But even when the TV was silent, music still floated through the air. The radio was always on somewhere, in the kitchen, in Dad's garage, or from a car parked across the street. We listened to Frank Sinatra, Doris Day, Patsy Cline. And when Elvis hit the airwaves for real, the world shifted. His voice was a rebellion dressed in velvet. My sister plastered his picture on her closet door, while I tried to comb my hair into a pompadour, like his, never quite getting it right. Later, when transistor radios came out, we could carry the music with us, pocket-sized soundtracks to our lives. We'd lie in bed at night, the little radio tucked under the pillow, the glow of the dial like a secret beacon. It felt like the whole world was singing just to us. And somehow, as we drifted off to sleep, the music mingled with our dreams. Back then, even silence had melody. On rainy days, those gray, sleepy afternoons, when the world outside was slick with puddles and the sound of dripping gutters, we stayed inside. But even then, boredom rarely had a chance to creep in. We had our toys, and we had our imaginations. That was all we needed. The floor of the living room would quickly become a battlefield of Lincoln logs, our wooden cities rising and falling between couch legs and coffee tables. Cowboys and soldiers made of stiff plastic took their positions behind pretend bunkers of stacked pillows. It wasn't about rules, it was about stories, and the best ones were made up on the spot. Then there was Mr. Potato Head. Though he didn't come with a plastic body back then, we had to supply our own potato. I remember digging through the sack under the sink for just the right spud, not too lumpy, not too skinny. Then we'd stick in those plastic eyes, the mustache, the ears. Sometimes we'd give him 2 noses just to be silly. He'd sit on the kitchen counter, slowly wilting, while we moved on to the next adventure. My sister spent hours with her paper dolls cutouts from the back of Katie Keene comic books, each one dressed to the nines. She'd design her own fashions, cut them from construction paper, and send them in, hoping they'd be published. I remember the look on her face when one finally was. She showed everyone the mailman, the grocer, even the Fuller Brush man. It was like winning the lottery, only better. Board games were another ritual. On quiet Saturday nights, we played Scrabble with the grown-ups, pretending we knew more words than we did. There was Yahtzee, the rattling of dice in a plastic cup echoing through the kitchen. An old maid, with its slightly creased cards and the silent dread of being left with the one no one wanted. We read comic books by flashlight under the covers, Mighty Mouse, Archie, and the newest adventures of Superman. Some even came with special glasses, space goggles. We called them that made the images leap from the page. I thought it was real magic. And when we finally stepped outside again, when the sun peeked through the clouds and the world turned golden, we did so dressed in clothes that carried stories of their own. The saddle shoes were always polished, even if the toes were scuffed by week's end. They were part of every girl's wardrobe, paired with crisp white socks and skirts that swished when they walked. And nothing swished quite like a poodle skirt. Bright, round, made of felt, and decorated with a stitched poodle on a leash that danced as you twirled. It wasn't just a piece of clothing, it was a declaration. I belong to this moment in time. The boys? We had our jeans cuffed at the ankle, white t-shirts and hair slicked just so. We wanted to look like the boys on TV, like Elvis, or the cool teens in drive-in movies. Our shirts were tucked in, our combs stuck out from our back pockets, and even if we didn't say much about it, we noticed when the girls wore their poodle skirts. Because Friday nights weren't just for soda fountains and burgers, they were for sock hops. There was something magical about the way the neon lights bounced off the chrome and glass of the soda fountain. Ours was a small one, tucked between the Rexall drugstore and the barber shop, with a striped awning out front and a bell above the door that jingled every time someone walked in. Inside, the air was always thick with the scent of malted milk, warm fudge, and sweet cherry cola. You could hear the clatter of spoons against glass before you even opened the door. On Friday nights, the soda fountain was the place to be. Not the movies, not the roller rink, just a little counter with a handful of stools, a row of booths by the window, and a jukebox in the corner that seemed to know every mood we carried in our chest. The jukebox glowed like a time machine, gleaming red and gold, with song titles neatly listed behind its curved glass. You'd drop in a nickel, scroll through the little metal tags, Elvis, Buddy Holly, The Platters, Connie Francis, and press the button like you were choosing the soundtrack to your own coming-of-age film. As the needle dropped, the music swelled, and suddenly, everything made sense again. I remember sitting on those red vinyl stools, my feet dangling above the floor, heart pounding louder than the song playing. I was maybe 13, maybe 14, hair slicked back, shirt tucked in just right, trying to act cool even though my palms were sweating. She walked in wearing a pale blue cardigan and a skirt that caught the light like it had been stitched with sunshine. We didn't talk much, just ordered 2 chocolate sodas and shared a straw. Every now and then, our knees would brush under the counter. It felt electric. The soda jerk, his name was Tommy, wore a white apron and a paper hat that never sat straight. He had a knack for piling the ice cream just high enough to impress the girls without tipping the glass. He'd slide over a banana split like it was a prize, with whipped cream clouds and cherries perched like little jewels. When he wasn't mixing drinks, he was flipping nickels into the jukebox, playing Earth Angel or Rock Around the Clock on repeat. Sometimes the older kids would dance between the tables just a few steps, a quiet sway to the music because no one cared if the space was too small. The soda fountain wasn't about space. It was about belonging. It was where you found out who liked who, where crushes were born, where someone might scribble your name on a napkin, then slide it across the counter with a shaky smile. It was a safe place to feel something, and not be teased for it. As the night wore on, and the glasses emptied, and the last nickels found their way into the jukebox, we'd step outside into the warm night air. Streetlights shimmered on the sidewalk. Moths danced in their yellow glow. And if you were lucky, maybe you'd get to walk her home. Not holding hands, not yet. Just walking a few steps too close. Talking about songs in school and nothing in particular. But long after you'd waved goodnight, and long after the jukebox had gone silent, you'd lie awake in bed, still tasting the cherry on your lips, still hearing the echo of that song. And you'd wonder if she was lying in her bed, wondering too. There are Christmas mornings, and then there's that Christmas morning. The one that settles somewhere deep inside you, like a snow globe, memory quiet, glittering, eternal. It had snowed the night before. Not much, just a light dusting enough to cover the bare patches of grass on the lawn and give the rooftops that sugar-coated look. I remember waking up before the sun, the house still in silence, the air heavy with the scent of pine, cinnamon, and just a hint of last night's roast still lingering in the walls. We were told firmly not to go downstairs until Mom and Dad were up. But we were kids, and rules like that were meant to be tested. So we crept. The tree was already glowing. Mom must have plugged in the lights before we woke, little colored bulbs blinking slowly, casting soft red and green shadows on the hardwood floor. Beneath it were packages wrapped in metallic paper, bows crooked from having been retied 3 times, and tags written in Dad's unmistakable scrawl. But all of it faded blurred into the background because there, just beside the fireplace, propped up like it had always belonged, stood the Western Flyer. My first real bicycle. Red, with bright white sidewalls and chrome handlebars that gleamed even in the dim morning light. It had a black leather seat, stitched tight, and silver fenders that curved like wings over each tire. To my eyes, it wasn't just a bike. It was freedom with pedals. I couldn't speak. I just walked up to it slowly, fingers grazing the cool frame, heart pounding like it had to catch up with the moment. I remember the tag hanging from the handlebar, just one word in red ink. Yours. Dad came downstairs a moment later, holding a mug of coffee, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "You like it?" he asked, even though he already knew the answer. I nodded, too stunned to form words. And then I did what every kid in the 1950s did when they got their first bike. I rode it through the house, just one circle through the living room, past the fireplace, narrowly missing the leg of the couch as Mom called from the kitchen. "Not inside, you'll scuff the floors." But I didn't hear her. Not really. I was already outside in my mind, racing down Maple Street, baseball cards clipped to the spokes, coat flapping behind me like a cape. I imagined my feet never touching the ground again. That Western Flyer would be my most loyal companion for years to come. We delivered newspapers together, rode to the corner store for penny candy, carried fishing poles down to the creek, and sometimes just took off with no destination, only the wind and the sound of tires on pavement. It wasn't the most expensive bike in the shop, but it was mine, and that made it priceless. Years later, I'd see it again, dusty and forgotten, in the back of the garage, one handlebar bent, tires worn thin. But I never threw it away, because some things aren't meant to be discarded. Some things carry more than their weight in steel and rubber. They carry you. Sunday in our town didn't start with alarm clocks or loud radios. It began with stillness, a kind of hush that settled over the streets like a woolen shawl, pulled gently across your shoulders. Even the wind seemed to move slower on Sundays. The first sound I'd hear was always the same, the distant toll of church bells, rising from the little white steeple at the end of Main Street. The sound drifted through our open windows, mingling with the scent of brewed coffee and maple syrup from the kitchen. Mom would be ironing dresses before breakfast, smoothing out pleats with the steam hissing like whispers. My brother and I, still half asleep, would button our stiff shirts while Dad knotted his tie in the mirror. No one asked whether we were going to church. That wasn't a question. It was simply what you did. Main Street on a Sunday morning looked like a postcard that someone forgot to write on. The grocery store was closed. The barber pole had stopped spinning. The pharmacy lights were off. Even the 5 and dime, with its cheerful window displays, pulled its shades and left a handwritten sign. Closed for the Sabbath. It was the one day of the week when the world agreed to slow down. And so we walked families in quiet processions, children in shiny shoes that pinched our toes, mothers with handbags looped over gloved wrists, and fathers in pressed suits. We didn't need to drive. The church was just far enough to make the walk feel like part of the ritual. Inside, the pews creaked beneath familiar bodies. Hymns rose like warmth into the rafters. We sang not because we had to, but because we knew the words by heart. I can still hear the rustle of pages, the cough of someone trying to be quiet, the soft sniffle of a child bored by eternity. After the service, we lingered, on the steps, on the sidewalk, in front of the wrought iron gate. Neighbors who barely spoke all week would now trade stories, compliments, or recipes. Children chased each other around the hedges. Somewhere, someone would hand you a butterscotch candy pulled from the depths of a coin purse. And then came the quiet. The long, gentle quiet of a Sunday afternoon. You could ride your bike through downtown without seeing a single car. The hum of traffic was gone, replaced by birdsong and the occasional bark of a dog. If you needed milk or eggs, you knocked on your neighbor's door. No one thought it strange. Borrowing was just another word for trust. The day stretched on like a soft sigh. We'd return home, shoes off, shirts untucked, and the house would fill with the scent of pot roast and slow-cooked carrots. Dinner was earlier on Sundays, softer, more sacred. And after the dishes were done and the sun had lowered itself just behind the treetops, we'd all settle in the living room, tired not from busyness, but from stillness. Sometimes Dad would read the paper. Sometimes Mom would hum a hymn as she darned a sock. And sometimes, often, we'd just sit in the silence, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the rocking chair. It was in those moments that I first learned what peace felt like. Not the peace you chase, but the kind you return to. Sunday in our town didn't start with alarm clocks or loud radios. It began with stillness, a kind of hush that settled over the streets like a woolen shawl pulled gently across your shoulders. Even the wind seemed to move slower on Sundays. The first sound I'd hear was always the same, the distant toll of church bells rising from the little white steeple at the end of Main Street. The sound drifted through our open windows, mingling with the scent of brewed coffee and maple syrup from the kitchen. Mom would be ironing dresses before breakfast, smoothing out pleats with the steam hissing like whispers. My brother and I, still half asleep, would button our stiff shirts while Dad knotted his tie in the mirror. No one asked whether we were going to church. That wasn't a question. It was simply what you did. Main Street on a Sunday morning looked like a postcard that someone forgot to write on. The grocery store was closed. The barber pole had stopped spinning. The pharmacy lights were off. Even the 5 and dime, with its cheerful window displays, pulled its shades and left a handwritten sign. Closed for the Sabbath. It was the one day of the week when the world agreed to slow down. And so we walked families, in quiet processions, children in shiny shoes that pinched our toes, mothers with handbags looped over gloved wrists, and fathers in pressed suits. We didn't need to drive. The church was just far enough to make the walk feel like part of the ritual. Inside, the pews creaked beneath familiar bodies. Hymns rose like warmth into the rafters. We sang not because we had to, but because we knew the words by heart. I can still hear the rustle of pages, the cough of someone trying to be quiet, the soft sniffle of a child bored by eternity. After the service, we lingered. On the steps, on the sidewalk, in front of the wrought iron gate. Neighbors who barely spoke all week would now trade stories, compliments, or recipes. Children chased each other around the hedges. Somewhere, someone would hand you a butterscotch candy pulled from the depths of a coin purse. And then came the quiet. The long, gentle quiet of a Sunday afternoon. You could ride your bike through downtown without seeing a single car. The hum of traffic was gone, replaced by birdsong and the occasional bark of a dog. If you needed milk or eggs, you knocked on your neighbor's door. No one thought it strange. Borrowing was just another word for trust. The day stretched on like a soft sigh. We'd return home, shoes off, shirts untucked, and the house would fill with the scent of pot roast and slow-cooked carrots. Dinner was earlier on Sundays, softer, more sacred. And after the dishes were done and the sun had lowered itself just behind the treetops, we'd all settle in the living room, tired not from busyness, but from stillness. Sometimes Dad would read the paper. Sometimes Mom would hum a hymn as she darned a sock. And often we'd just sit in the silence, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the rocking chair. It was in those moments that I first learned what peace felt like. Not the peace you chase, but the kind you return to. Time has a strange way of folding itself. It doesn't move like we expect. It lingers in some places, rushes through others, and every so often it doubles back not to be relived, but to be remembered. That's what the 1950s have become for me, not a decade on a calendar, but a scent, a sound, a series of soft-edged images that arrive uninvited, like a song you forgot you loved. Sometimes it comes back with the creak of a screen door on a warm afternoon, or the jingle of ice cream bells in the far distance, even if no truck is coming. Sometimes it's the worn feel of a comic book found in a dusty box, or the sound of Elvis on a scratchy radio station that only plays oldies on Sundays. But mostly, it returns in quiet moments when I see a child balancing on a bicycle for the first time, or hear a father calling his kids in for dinner as the sky blushes pink. These are echoes not of grandeur, but of the gentle beauty of ordinary life. Because that was the magic of the 1950s. It wasn't perfect. We didn't know the world like we do now. But in its simplicity, there was something whole, something grounded, something worth holding on to. We had milkmen and paperboys, jukeboxes and rotary phones. We had trust left on doorsteps and friendships sealed over soda counters. We had sock hops and saddle shoes, felt skirts with stitched poodles, and glass bottles of cola shared with 2 straws. We had families that ate together, played together, and gathered in silence to listen to one another breathe. And above all, we had time. Not the rushed, digitized, sliced into calendar blocks kind of time, but slow time, real time. Time that tasted like cherry pie and crackled like vinyl. And now, all these years later, I carry that time with me, in my memories, in my bones, in the way I sometimes still press my ear to the wind, half hoping I'll hear the clip-clop of a horse-drawn cart, or the static hum of a black-and-white TV about to sign off for the night. I know those days are gone, but I also know something truer still. If you grew up in the 1950s, you don't ever really leave it. You carry it, you share it, you pass it on. And when the world feels too fast, too loud, too unkind, you close your eyes and you go back.